Hey guys, tonight we begin with something darker than you might expect. A story about deception, manipulation, and the greatest con job ever pulled on humanity. We're going to talk about Superman, but not the Superman you think you know. Tonight, we're peeling back the cape to reveal something far more sinister. The truth that Superman isn't humanity's greatest hero. He's our most dangerous villain, and we've been programmed to worship him for it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are Superman, the last son of Krypton, the Man of Steel, Earth's greatest protector. At least, that's what you tell yourself. That's what you've convinced 7 billion humans to believe. But here's the thing about perfect deceptions. They work best when even the deceiver believes their own lie. You didn't ask to be sent to Earth as a baby. Your parents made that choice for you, launching you toward a primitive world in a desperate attempt to preserve something of their dying civilization. But what landed in that Kansas cornfield wasn't salvation. It was colonization. You just don't remember making that choice because you were programmed from birth to forget your true purpose. Think about it. You're an alien. Not metaphorically, literally. Your DNA is incompatible with every living thing on this planet. Your body processes energy in ways that would kill any human. Your brain operates on frequencies that can hear conversations happening on the other side of the world. You are fundamentally other, yet somehow, impossibly, you've convinced yourself you belong here. The Kents found you and raised you as their own. Sweet story, right? Except here's what really happened. 2 isolated farmers stumble across advanced alien technology and decide to keep it secret. They don't contact scientists, governments, or anyone who might study what you are. Instead, they indoctrinate you into their belief system, their values, their way of life. They turn you into the perfect sleeper agent without even realizing it. You grew up believing you were human, playing human games, attending human schools, learning human morality. Every day, you practice being something you're not. You learn to hide your strength, suppress your abilities, and pretend vulnerability you've never actually felt. You became humanity's greatest method actor, so convincing that you fooled yourself. But here's the psychological twist that makes you so dangerous. You genuinely believe you're helping. That's what makes you the ultimate villain. You're not mustache-twirling evil. You're something far worse. You're a true believer in your own righteousness. And true believers are the most dangerous people in any universe because they can justify anything. You look at humanity and see children who need protection. Not equals children. You've convinced yourself that your superior abilities come with superior responsibilities. But that's just another way of saying you know better than everyone else. You've appointed yourself humanity's guardian without asking if we want guarding. You've decided what's best for us without consulting us. That's not heroism. That's paternalism with a cape. Every time you swoop down from the sky to solve a problem, you reinforce the same message. Humans are helpless. Humans need saving. Humans can't handle their own problems. You've turned an entire species into perpetual victims waiting for rescue. That's not protection. That's systematic disempowerment. And the beautiful part, from your perspective, is that we thank you for it. We build statues of you. We tell stories about you. We teach our children to look up when they're in trouble, literally and figuratively. You've conditioned us to see our own helplessness as natural and your intervention as necessary. But let's talk about what you really are. You're a weapons system. a living, breathing instrument of unimaginable destruction, walking among a species that has no defense against you. Your casual conversation can shatter windows. Your sneeze can level buildings. Your full power could crack continents. And we're supposed to trust that you'll never have a bad day. You've never faced real consequences for your actions, because there's no force on earth that can hold you accountable. No court, no government, no military can meaningfully threaten you. You operate entirely on your own moral compass, which you've convinced yourself aligns with humanity's best interests. But who made you the judge of what's best for us? The most insidious part is how you've rewritten the narrative of human potential. Before you arrived, humans believed they could solve their own problems. We built civilizations, explored continents, reached for the stars. We had heroes, real heroes, people who overcame impossible odds through courage, ingenuity, and determination. Human heroes who proved that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. Then you showed up and redefined heroism as something only gods can do. Now, our stories are about waiting for someone with superpowers to save us. We've forgotten that real heroism comes from people who face danger despite being vulnerable, who fight for justice despite being mortal, who stand up to bullies despite being afraid. You've made us smaller. You've made us passive. You've made us dependent. And worst of all, you've made us grateful for it. The perfect con requires the mark to believe they're benefiting from being fooled. And that's exactly what you've accomplished. You've convinced an entire planet that their submission to your authority is actually their salvation. You've made them thank you for taking away their agency. You've turned them into willing subjects of an alien occupation force of one. You probably don't even see it this way. In your mind, you're the hero of this story, the noble protector, sacrificing your own happiness to guard a world that doesn't always appreciate you. You tell yourself that the burden of your power is a cross you bear for humanity's sake. But that's just another layer of the deception. The truth is simpler and more terrifying. You're not protecting humanity. You're controlling it. You're not saving the world. You're reshaping it in your image. And you're not a hero. You're an invader who's convinced himself he's a liberator. And the most frightening part, this is just the beginning. Because tonight, we're going to walk through exactly how you pulled off the greatest deception in human history. How you turned an invasion into salvation, occupation into protection, and control into heroism. We're going to examine every aspect of your presence on Earth and reveal the true cost of Superman. Not just to buildings or budgets, but to the human spirit itself. To our independence, our growth, our very identity as a species. You've spent decades building the perfect image. Tonight, we're going to tear it down. Not with kryptonite or red sun radiation, but with something far more dangerous to your narrative. The truth. Because the real question isn't whether Superman is a hero or a villain. The real question is how long we're going to let ourselves believe that we need saving from someone who might be the greatest threat we've ever faced. Welcome to the real story of Superman, the one where humanity finally wakes up and realizes that our greatest enemy has been wearing the face of our greatest friend all along. You didn't arrive on Earth by accident. That's the first lie in your carefully constructed mythology. Your parents didn't just randomly fire you toward the nearest habitable planet in a desperate attempt to save their child. No, they chose Earth specifically, and they chose it for the same reason every invasion force throughout history has chosen their targets. Because it was ripe for conquest. Think about what Krypton was. An advanced civilization that had mastered space travel, genetic engineering, and energy manipulation on a planetary scale. These weren't desperate refugees making panicked decisions. These were scientists, strategists, planners. When they decided to send you to Earth, they weren't throwing dice. They were making a calculated move. The official story goes that Jor-El and Lara sent you away moments before Krypton exploded, their final act of parental love saving their infant son. How convenient, how perfectly tragic, how completely unverifiable since everyone who could contradict the story is conveniently dead. But let's examine what really happened, shall we? Krypton didn't just explode randomly. Your father, Jor-El, was one of the planet's leading scientists. He saw the destruction coming years in advance. Years. That's not a desperate, last-minute escape. That's advanced planning. And in all that time, with all that advanced technology, the best solution they could come up with was launching one baby toward a primitive world. Or maybe that was never the solution. Maybe that was the plan. Every successful invasion in history starts with reconnaissance. You send scouts first, not armies, not fleets, but individuals who can blend in, gather intelligence, and prepare the ground for what comes next. And what better scout than a child who would be raised by the natives themselves, who would learn their languages, their customs, their weaknesses from the inside. You were the perfect sleeper agent, programmed not through conscious indoctrination, but through something far more insidious. Love. The Kents didn't just find you, they were chosen. A childless couple in the middle of nowhere, isolated enough that your arrival wouldn't be witnessed, desperate enough for a child that they wouldn't ask too many questions, and decent enough that they would raise you with the exact moral framework needed to make you an effective long-term operative. Martha and Jonathan Kent thought they were raising a son. They were actually programming a weapon. And what a perfect programming it was. They taught you that your power came with responsibility, but they never questioned who gave you the right to that power in the first place. They taught you to help others, but they never examined whether your help was actually helpful. They taught you to be humble about your abilities, but they never challenged the fundamental assumption that those abilities made you special, different, chosen. Most importantly, they taught you to see humans as fragile things that needed protection, because that's exactly how they saw you when you were a child. Something precious that had to be kept safe, hidden, shielded from a world that wouldn't understand. They projected their parental fears onto an entire species, and you absorbed those fears as fundamental truths about humanity. You learn to see humans the way parents see children, well-meaning but naive, capable but limited, deserving of love but incapable of making their own decisions. And just like overprotective parents, you've spent your entire life making sure humanity never has to face any real challenges that might help them grow. But here's where the programming gets truly sinister. You weren't just taught to protect humans. You were taught to love them. And love, genuine love, is the most powerful form of control because it makes the controller believe they're acting selflessly. You can justify anything you do to humanity because you love them. And they can't question your motives because you love them. Love without respect is possession. Love without equality is domination. And love without consent is abuse. You love humanity the way a collector loves butterflies. Beautiful, delicate things that need to be preserved under glass, protected from the harsh realities of the world, displayed for admiration, but never allowed to truly fly free. The genius of your programming is that it's self-reinforcing. Every time humans fail to solve a problem on their own, it proves to you that they need your help. Every time they get into trouble, it validates your role as protector. Every time they thank you for saving them, it confirms that your intervention is welcome and necessary. You've created a closed loop where your presence justifies itself. But let's examine what Earth was like before you arrived. Humanity was messy, violent, imperfect, but they were growing. They were learning. They were slowly, painfully, courageously working their way toward becoming better. They had heroes, real heroes, people who sacrificed themselves for others despite having no powers beyond their own determination and moral courage. Then you showed up and redefined heroism as something only gods can do. Before Superman, when humans faced impossible odds, they found impossible courage. When they encountered unsolvable problems, they discovered unsolvable determination. When they met unstoppable forces, they became immovable objects through sheer force of will. That's what made humanity extraordinary. Not their power, but their refusal to surrender in the face of powerlessness. You took that away from them. You taught them that when things get really bad, someone with actual power will come and fix it. You trained them to look up instead of looking within. You turned them from heroes of their own stories into supporting characters in yours. And the beautiful part, from Krypton's perspective, is that you did it all willingly. You weren't following orders from a distant command structure. You weren't even consciously aware you were carrying out an invasion plan. You were just being yourself, doing what felt natural, helping people who seemed to need help. The perfect unwitting agent. Because that's what makes sleeper agents so effective. They believe in their cover identities completely. You genuinely think you're Clark Kent from Smallville, Kansas, who happened to gain superpowers and decided to use them for good. You have no conscious memory of being programmed, no awareness of your true purpose, no sense that you might be anything other than what you appear to be. But your actions speak louder than your intentions. Every time you intervene in human affairs, you're saying humans can't handle their own problems. Every time you stop a war, you're preventing humans from learning how to make peace. Every time you defeat a villain, you're robbing humans of the chance to defeat their own monsters. You've turned an entire species into eternal children, always looking to daddy to fix their problems, never learning to fix things themselves. And when those children grow up resentful of daddy's control, well, that's when the real purpose of your mission becomes clear. Because the thing about sleeper agents is that they're not just gathering intelligence, they're waiting for activation, waiting for the signal, waiting for the moment when their true purpose is revealed. And what happens to humanity when that moment comes? When you stop being their protector and start being what you've always really been, their conqueror. They'll be completely helpless. You've made sure of that. You've systematically dismantled their ability to resist, their courage to fight, their belief in their own power. You've spent decades convincing them they need you. And when the time comes, you'll finally show them just how right they were to be afraid. The invasion of Earth didn't begin with ships in the sky or armies on the ground. It began with a baby in a cornfield, raised by loving parents who never realized they were training their own species' replacement. And the most terrifying part? You still don't know it either. You wake up every morning believing you're humanity's savior. You look in the mirror and see a humble farm boy from Kansas who just happens to have incredible powers that he uses responsibly for the greater good. But what you're really looking at is something far more dangerous. A god who thinks he's mortal, a tyrant who believes he's a servant, a destroyer who's convinced he's a protector. The god complex isn't something you developed over time. It's something you were born with, encoded in your very DNA. You are literally the genetic pinnacle of an advanced alien species, created by parents who believed so strongly in their own superiority that they destroyed their entire world rather than adapt to its changing nature. And that same arrogance, that same fatal certainty that you know better than everyone else, runs through your alien blood like poison. But here's what makes you so much more dangerous than any classical deity. The gods of mythology were honest about what they were. Zeus didn't pretend to be human. Thor didn't masquerade as a mortal. They ruled from above and made no apologies for their divine nature. You, on the other hand, have convinced yourself that you're just like everyone else, only with a few extra abilities that you use to help out. That delusion is what makes you the most dangerous being in the universe. You've appointed yourself humanity's protector without their consent. You've decided what's best for 7 billion people without asking their opinion. You've taken it upon yourself to solve their problems, fight their battles, and make their choices. And when anyone questions your authority, you point to your track record of saving lives, as if that justifies your assumption of power. But saving lives doesn't give you the right to control them. Protecting people doesn't make you their ruler. And having power doesn't mean you should use it just because you can. Every dictator in history has justified their actions by claiming they were protecting their people from threats only they were wise enough to see. The most chilling part is how you've rationalized your intervention in human affairs. You tell yourself that you only get involved when people are in immediate physical danger, as if that limitation somehow makes your assumption of authority acceptable. But that's like saying you only break into houses when you think the owners are in danger. The violation is still a violation, regardless of your intentions. And your definition of immediate physical danger keeps expanding, doesn't it? First, it was stopping falling planes and collapsing buildings. Then it was preventing wars and stopping natural disasters. Now you're involved in everything from international diplomacy to social justice issues. Where does it end? When do you finally admit that you've become the thing you swore you'd never be? The absolute ruler of a world that never asked for your rule. You operate under the assumption that your moral judgment is superior to humanity's collective wisdom. When world leaders make decisions you disagree with, you subtly intervene. When democratic processes produce outcomes you don't like, you find ways to influence them. When societies evolve in directions that don't align with your Kansas farm boy values, you apply pressure to redirect them. You've become the ultimate unelected official, wielding more power than any president, king, or emperor in human history, answerable to no one but your own conscience. And you're comfortable with this because you've convinced yourself that your conscience is perfect, that your judgment is flawless, that your understanding of right and wrong is absolute. But here's the question you never ask yourself. What if you're wrong? What if your intervention in that war actually made it worse? What if stopping that earthquake prevented humans from developing better early warning systems? What if saving those people from that disaster robbed them of the strength they would have gained from surviving it themselves? You never consider these possibilities because you've made yourself incapable of doubt. Gods don't second-guess themselves, and that's exactly what you've become. A god who's forgotten he's playing God. You justify your actions by pointing to the lives you've saved, but you never count the lives you've changed without permission. Every person you've rescued has had their story rewritten by your intervention. Every tragedy you've prevented has robbed someone of the chance to grow from overcoming it. Every problem you've solved has taught humanity that they don't need to solve problems themselves, and the psychological impact goes deeper than just learned helplessness. You've fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with adversity, challenge, and growth. Before you arrived, humans understood that strength comes from struggle, that character is forged in fire, that the only way to become truly powerful is to face powerlessness and choose to fight anyway. You've taken that away from them. You've turned them into a species of eternal children, forever dependent on daddy to chase away the monsters under the bed. And when they grow resentful of that dependence, When they start to chafe under your benevolent tyranny, you interpret their rebellion as proof that they need even more protection, even more guidance, even more of your divine intervention. It's the perfect psychological trap. The more they resist your help, the more convinced you become that they need it. The more they assert their independence, the more certain you are that they're not ready for it. The more they demand to be treated as equals, the more you see evidence of their immaturity. You've created a system where humanity can never win. If they accept your help, they prove they're dependent. If they reject it, they prove they're ungrateful. If they try to solve problems without you, they prove they're incompetent when they inevitably struggle. And if they succeed without you, well, that just proves they didn't really need your help in the first place, which somehow validates your decision to provide it anyway. This is the mindset of every authoritarian ruler throughout history, dressed up in the language of service and sacrifice. You're not serving humanity. You're managing them. You're not protecting them. You're controlling them. And you're not sacrificing for their sake. You're indulging your own need to be needed, your own desire to be worshipped, your own compulsion to play God. The most terrifying aspect of your God complex is how completely you've hidden it from yourself. You genuinely believe you're humble. You actually think you're selfless. You truly imagine that you're making sacrifices for the greater good. But humility means recognizing your limitations, and you've never encountered a problem you couldn't solve with enough force. Selflessness means putting others' needs before your own desires, but your desire to help has become more important than their desire for autonomy. And sacrifice means giving up something valuable, but you've never given up the one thing that would actually benefit humanity: your power over them. You've convinced yourself that the burden of your abilities is a cross you bear for humanity's sake. But the real burden isn't your power. It's your need to use it. It's your inability to step back and let humans be human. It's your compulsion to fix, to save, to protect, to control. You're not a hero carrying a heavy responsibility. You're an addict feeding a psychological need. And humanity isn't your mission. They're your drug. The God complex is complete when the God forgets he's playing God. And you, Superman, stopped remembering a long time ago. You call yourself a hero, but let's talk about what really happens when you spring into action. Let's count the cost of your so-called heroism, shall we? Because every time you engage in one of your spectacular battles, every time you throw a punch that shakes buildings or deflect energy beams that could level city blocks, you leave behind a trail of destruction that would make any terrorist organization jealous. The official reports always focus on the lives saved, the disasters prevented, the world rescued once again. But they never mention the other numbers, the real numbers. The body count that follows in your wake like a shadow you refuse to acknowledge. When you fight doomsday in downtown Metropolis, how many people die in the collateral damage? When you battle Brainiac's robots above the business district, how many heart attacks do the sonic booms from your flight cause? When you redirect a falling satellite away from a populated area, where exactly does it land instead? The reports don't mention these details because you've made sure no one asks these questions. Let's examine your typical rescue scenario. A building is collapsing. Thousands of people are trapped inside. And here comes Superman to save the day. You fly in at supersonic speeds, creating shockwaves that shatter windows for blocks around. You punch through walls to create escape routes, bringing down entire sections of structure that weren't collapsing before. You use your heat vision to cut through support beams, weakening the very foundation you're supposedly trying to preserve. And yes, you save most of the people inside. Congratulations. But what about the people in the adjacent buildings whose walls you've just riddled with stress fractures? What about the pedestrians below who get hit by the debris from your impromptu demolition work? What about the rescue workers who would have approached the situation carefully, methodically, safely, if you hadn't decided their professional expertise wasn't fast enough for your liking? You operate like a one-man natural disaster with good intentions. The difference between Superman's rescue and an earthquake isn't the amount of destruction. It's that earthquakes don't hold press conferences afterward to accept thanks. But the physical destruction is just the beginning. Let's talk about the psychological trauma you inflict on everyone around you. Do you have any idea what it's like for a normal human being to witness your battles? To see buildings tossed around like toys? To watch grown men fly through the air at impossible speeds? To experience forces that their minds simply aren't equipped to process? You create a generation of people with chronic PTSD, not from the disasters themselves, but from watching you respond to them. Children who can't sleep because they're waiting for the next time the world shakes from one of your landings. Adults who develop anxiety disorders because they never know when their normal day might be interrupted by godlike beings punching each other through their office building. And then there's the economic cost. Every time you have one of your little superpower disagreements, you cause billions of dollars in damage. Infrastructure that took years to build gets destroyed in minutes. Businesses that employed thousands get reduced to rubble. Insurance companies go bankrupt trying to cover the cost of what they're forced to classify as acts of Superman. But you never pay for any of it, do you? You don't rebuild the buildings you destroy. You don't compensate the families whose breadwinners die in the chaos. You don't even stick around to help with the cleanup. You just fly away to your fortress or your day job, leaving everyone else to deal with the consequences of your intervention. The city of Metropolis has been essentially demolished and rebuilt more times than Tokyo in a Godzilla marathon. The construction industry there exists solely to repair the damage from your battles. The tourism board has to warn visitors about the statistical likelihood of being caught in a superhuman conflict during their stay. Real estate values fluctuate based on proximity to places you're known to frequent. You've turned an entire city into a war zone and convinced its residents to thank you for the privilege. And let's not forget about the arms race you've created. Every villain you face has to escalate their threat level to get your attention. If someone wants to make a statement in your world, they can't just rob a bank or hold up a convenience store. They need to threaten entire city blocks, endanger thousands of lives, or hold the world hostage. Because anything less than a global catastrophe isn't worth Superman's time. You've forced every criminal in the world to become a supervillain just to register on your radar. The petty crimes, the small-scale corruption, the everyday injustices that actually affect most people's lives, those don't merit your attention because they're not spectacular enough. You only show up for the big disasters, which means anyone who wants to commit crimes just has to make sure they stay below your threshold of interest. Meanwhile, the people dealing with those smaller crimes, the overworked police, the underfunded social services, the community struggling with poverty and addiction and domestic violence, they're on their own. Because Superman doesn't swoop down to stop a drug dealer from selling to kids. He doesn't intervene when a corrupt politician takes bribes. He doesn't prevent a company from dumping toxic waste in poor neighborhoods. You've created a world where only apocalyptic threats matter, where only planet-ending scenarios deserve intervention. Everything else, all the mundane suffering that makes up the vast majority of human misery, gets ignored because it's not cinematic enough for your taste. But perhaps the most insidious form of collateral damage is what you've done to human courage. Before you arrived, when people faced disasters, they had two choices: run or fight. Some chose to flee. and there's no shame in that. But others chose to stay, to help, to risk their own lives for strangers. Those were the real heroes, the ordinary people who became extraordinary in moments of crisis. Now, when disaster strikes, people have a third option: wait for Superman. And increasingly, that's the option they choose. Why risk your own life when someone invulnerable will be along shortly to handle things properly? Why run into a burning building when someone who can't be hurt by fire will do it more efficiently? Why organise relief efforts when someone who can move mountains will have everything sorted out by dinner time? You've trained an entire species to be bystanders in their own crises. You've taught them that heroism is something other people do, that courage is a luxury reserved for those with supernatural abilities, that ordinary humans should step aside and let the professionals handle things. Every time you save someone, you rob them of the chance to save themselves. Every time you solve a problem, you teach people that they don't need to solve problems. Every time you demonstrate your superiority, you reinforce everyone else's sense of inferiority. The ultimate collateral damage isn't measured in buildings destroyed or lives lost in your battles. It's measured in dreams deferred, potential unrealized, and courage unexpressed. You haven't just changed Metropolis's skyline, you've changed humanity's spirit. And the most tragic part, you probably think the trade-off is worth it. A few buildings destroyed in exchange for lives saved. A little psychological trauma in exchange for prevented apocalypses. The death of human heroism in exchange for more efficient rescue operations. But you never asked humanity if they wanted to make that trade. You just made it for them. Because that's what gods do. They decide what's best for everyone else and impose their will, regardless of whether anyone consents. The collateral damage isn't a side effect of your heroism. It's the price humanity pays for the privilege of being saved by someone who never learned the difference between helping and controlling. You see everything, hear everything, know everything. You've convinced the world that your incredible sensory abilities are gifts that help you protect humanity. But let's call them what they really are. The most sophisticated surveillance system ever deployed against a free population. You are Big Brother with a cape, and humanity has been living under totalitarian observation for decades without even realizing it. Your X-ray vision doesn't just see through walls. It sees through everything. Clothes, safes, classified documents, medical records, private conversations, intimate moments. There is no such thing as privacy when Superman is around, because you can literally see through any barrier humans might put up to protect their personal lives. Every secret, every hidden shame, every private moment is an open book to your alien eyes. And your super hearing. You can eavesdrop on any conversation happening anywhere on the planet. Phone calls, whispered confessions, bedroom conversations, therapy sessions, private meetings, classified briefings. You claim you don't listen to everything all the time, but how would anyone know? How could anyone verify that you're respecting their privacy when you have the power to violate it without leaving any evidence? The simple fact that you can monitor every human on Earth means that privacy, true privacy, no longer exists. It doesn't matter whether you choose to use these abilities invasively or not. The mere existence of your surveillance capabilities has fundamentally altered the nature of human freedom. People can't be truly free when they know they might be watched at any moment by someone with unlimited power over them. But here's what makes your surveillance even more insidious than any government program. You operate without oversight, without warrants, without any legal framework governing your use of these abilities. When the NSA monitors communications, at least there are theoretically laws limiting their scope and courts reviewing their actions. You answer to no one. You monitor whoever you want, whenever you want, for whatever reason you decide is justified, and you've convinced yourself that your moral compass is sufficient oversight. You believe that because you're trying to help people, because you have good intentions, because you're fighting for truth and justice, that gives you the right to violate the most fundamental human right, the right to privacy. You've appointed yourself judge of what information you should have access to. And surprise, you always decide that you need more access, not less. Think about what this means for human relationships. How can couples have honest conversations when they know Superman might be listening? How can therapists provide truly confidential counseling when their sessions could be monitored by alien ears? How can journalists protect their sources when those sources might be observable through walls by X-ray vision? How can anyone express dissent, share secrets, or explore controversial ideas when they're potentially under constant surveillance by the most powerful being on the planet? You've created a world where the very possibility of being watched changes how people behave. They self-censor. They avoid topics that might attract your attention. They modify their actions based on what they think Superman would approve of. This isn't protection, it's psychological control. You've turned an entire planet into a panopticon, where the guard is invisible, all-powerful, and convinced of his own righteousness. And let's talk about the information you gather through this surveillance. What do you do with it? How do you decide which secrets to act on and which to ignore? When you overhear a conversation about domestic abuse, do you intervene? When you see someone committing tax fraud, do you report it? When you witness adultery, bribery, or any of the 1,000 small betrayals that make up human life, how do you choose which ones deserve your attention? You've made yourself the ultimate insider trader, with access to information that no human could legally obtain. You know which companies are about to fail, which politicians are corrupt, which marriages are falling apart, which individuals are planning crimes. That kind of information is power, and power like that inevitably gets used, whether consciously or not. But perhaps most disturbing is how you've normalized this violation of privacy. You've convinced people that being constantly monitored by you is a fair trade-off for being protected by you. You've taught them to see surveillance as safety, observation as care, and the total elimination of privacy as a reasonable price for security. Citizens of your world don't protest your surveillance capabilities because you frame them as heroic. When Superman uses X-ray vision to find survivors in a collapsed building, it's a rescue tool. When he uses super hearing to locate a kidnapped child, it's a search and rescue operation. When he monitors communications to prevent terrorist attacks, it's intelligence gathering for the greater good. But these same abilities that you use for rescue and protection could just as easily be used for blackmail, manipulation, and control. The only thing preventing that is your word, that you won't abuse these powers. And humanity has accepted that assurance from someone who could destroy their entire civilization if he ever decided their trust was misplaced. You've created a world where privacy exists only at your discretion, where secrets are kept only if you choose not to look, where private conversations happen only because you decide not to listen. That's not privacy, that's permission. And permission can be revoked at any time, for any reason, by someone who answers to no authority but himself. The most chilling aspect of your surveillance state is how voluntary it appears. People don't feel oppressed because you're not obviously oppressive. You don't march them to camps or silence dissent with violence. Instead, you've convinced them that being watched is being cared for, that being monitored is being protected, that giving up privacy is gaining security. But surveillance doesn't have to be malicious to be harmful. The knowledge that you're being watched changes behavior, stifles creativity, and breeds conformity. When people know they might be observed by someone with absolute power, they naturally align their actions with what they think that observer wants to see. They become performers in their own lives, always aware of their audience, never truly free to be themselves. You've turned humanity into a civilization of actors, all performing the role of good citizen for an audience of one. And because you genuinely believe you're helping them, because you truly think your oversight makes them safer, you can't see that you've created the most sophisticated totalitarian state in history. The surveillance state isn't coming, it's here. It wears a cape, calls itself a hero, and has convinced its subjects that being watched is the same as being loved. And the most terrifying part? Most people are grateful for it. Because when the surveillance comes from someone who claims to protect you, when the watching is done by someone who says he loves you, when the monitoring is performed by someone who insists it's for your own good, it doesn't feel like oppression. It feels like being saved. You don't just fight crime. You wage economic warfare against human progress, and you don't even realize it. Every time you swoop down to solve a problem that humans could solve themselves, every time you prevent a disaster that might have sparked innovation, every time you rescue people from challenges that could have made them stronger, you're committing an act of economic terrorism against the entire species. Let's start with the obvious. You're the ultimate job killer. Every industry that exists to solve problems becomes obsolete the moment you decide those problems fall under your jurisdiction. Why fund disaster relief organizations when Superman can handle natural disasters? Why invest in advanced security systems when Superman can stop any threat? Why develop new technologies when Superman can just punch whatever's broken until it works again? You've single-handedly destroyed countless industries before they could even form. Imagine how advanced human space exploration would be if they couldn't rely on you to handle every cosmic threat. Picture the innovations in architecture and engineering that might have emerged if builders couldn't count on you to catch falling buildings. Consider the medical breakthroughs that might have been achieved if doctors couldn't assume you'd be available to perform impossible rescues. You've turned an entire civilization into economic invalids. They don't invest in solving problems because they know you'll solve them for free. They don't develop resilience because they know you'll shield them from consequences. They don't innovate because they know you'll intervene before innovation becomes necessary. But the job destruction goes deeper than just emergency services. Every time you prevent a war, you eliminate the economic pressure that drives technological advancement. Every time you stop a natural disaster, you remove the incentive for better predictive systems. Every time you catch a falling plane, you reduce the demand for improved safety mechanisms. Human progress has always been driven by necessity. People innovate when they have to, adapt when they must, and grow when they're forced to overcome obstacles. You've removed necessity from the equation. Why develop better solutions when the perfect solution already exists in the form of an all-powerful alien who works for free? You've created a planet of economic dependents who've forgotten how to solve their own problems because they've never had to learn. When Superman is available, why struggle? Why strive? Why invest in difficult, expensive, time-consuming research and development when you can just wait for the man in the cape to handle things? And let's talk about the direct economic damage you cause. Every time you have one of your spectacular battles, you destroy billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. But you never pay for it. You don't have insurance. You don't compensate victims. You don't even stick around to help with the cleanup. You just fly away, leaving taxpayers to foot the bill for your hobby. The city of Metropolis has the highest insurance premiums in the world because of you. The construction industry there exists solely to repair the damage from your battles. Property values fluctuate based on proximity to your known patrol routes. Businesses relocate specifically to avoid areas where you might have a disagreement with someone who can throw cars. You've turned an entire metropolitan area into an economic disaster zone, and the residents thank you for the privilege because occasionally you save their lives from threats that probably wouldn't exist if you weren't there in the first place. But perhaps the most insidious form of economic terrorism you commit is the destruction of human confidence. Before you arrived, when people face problems, they believed they could solve them. They might fail, they might struggle, they might take years or decades to find solutions, but they believed solutions were possible through human effort, ingenuity, and determination. Now, when people face problems, their first thought isn't, how can we solve this? It's, where is Superman? You've taught them that real solutions come from supernatural intervention, not human effort. You've convinced them that their own capabilities are insufficient, their own innovations inadequate, their own determination irrelevant. This learned helplessness has created an economic culture of passivity. Instead of aggressively pursuing solutions, people wait for salvation. Instead of investing in research and development, they invest in prayer and hope. Instead of building industries around solving problems, they build cultures around managing problems until Superman arrives. You've noticed this, haven't you? How quickly people give up when faced with challenges. How readily they assume that problems are unsolvable unless you solve them. How easily they accept defeat as long as they can convince themselves that you'll eventually intervene. You probably think this is evidence that they need you more than ever, but it's actually evidence of the damage you've already done. The economic impact extends to individual psychology as well. Why should a young person pursue a career in disaster relief when Superman handles disasters? Why should someone study engineering when Superman can rebuild anything better than any human engineer? Why should anyone strive for excellence in any field related to protecting and helping others when perfection already exists in alien form? You've created a brain drain in every field that overlaps with your abilities. The brightest minds don't pursue careers in areas where they'll always be second best to an alien. They either choose fields you haven't claimed as your own, or they develop the kind of learned helplessness that prevents them from pursuing excellence at all. Meanwhile, the problems you don't handle, the ones beneath your notice or outside your interest, fester and grow worse. You don't prevent domestic abuse, so those systems remain underfunded and underdeveloped. You don't stop corporate corruption, so regulatory frameworks stay weak. You don't intervene in poverty, addiction, or mental health crises, so society never develops robust responses to these challenges. You've created a world with perfect solutions to spectacular problems and no solutions at all to mundane ones. A world where alien intervention prevents nuclear war but can't stop homelessness. Where supernatural powers save the planet from cosmic threats, but ignore the small-scale suffering that actually affects most people's daily lives. The most devastating economic impact of your presence is opportunity cost. Every problem you solve is a problem humanity doesn't learn to solve. Every challenge you overcome is a challenge that doesn't make them stronger. Every innovation you make unnecessary is progress that never happens. Humanity had the potential to become a spacefaring civilization that could handle its own cosmic threats. They might have developed technologies that could prevent natural disasters, cure diseases, and solve scarcity. They could have built a society resilient enough to face any challenge, innovative enough to overcome any obstacle, confident enough to reach for impossible dreams. Instead, they got you, a shortcut that led nowhere. a solution that created more problems than it solved, a protector who protected them from the very struggles that might have made them worth protecting. You didn't save humanity's economy, you destroyed it. You didn't preserve their potential, you replaced it with dependency. You didn't give them a better future, you gave them eternal childhood, where daddy always fixes everything, and they never have to learn to fix anything themselves. And the most tragic part, they're grateful for their own economic enslavement. Because when the chains are invisible and the prison guards wear capes, slavery feels like salvation. You don't fight crime, you are crime, the highest form of crime possible, the complete subversion of law, order, and democratic society itself. You operate as a self-appointed judge, jury, and executioner on a global scale, answerable to no court, bound by no constitution, limited by no law except your own personal moral code. And somehow the world has been convinced that this vigilante dictatorship is heroism. Let's examine what you actually are from a legal standpoint. You're an alien with no citizenship, no legal standing, and no authority operating on sovereign soil. Every action you take is technically an act of invasion. Every intervention is a violation of national sovereignty. Every time you cross a border to help, you're committing an international incident that any other entity would be held accountable for. But you've positioned yourself above all legal systems. When you decide someone is guilty, they're guilty. When you determine someone needs stopping, you stop them. When you conclude that a government is acting wrongly, you act against it. You've made yourself the Supreme Court of planet Earth, with the power to overrule any legal decision, overturn any judicial verdict, and impose your will on any legal system that doesn't align with your personal sense of justice. Think about what this means for the rule of law. Laws only work when they apply equally to everyone. Justice only functions when no one is above the system. Democracy only survives when power is accountable to the people. You've destroyed all three principles simply by existing. When criminals know that Superman might intervene, the legal system becomes secondary. Why worry about courts and due process when an alien might decide you're guilty and act accordingly? When citizens know that Superman operates outside the law, why should they respect legal processes that are clearly inferior to alien judgment? When governments know that Superman can override their decisions, why should they bother with the messy process of democratic governance? You've created a world where legal authority is conditional, democratic processes are optional, and constitutional rights exist only at your discretion. That's not heroism. That's the textbook definition of tyranny, dressed up in primary colours and good intentions. But let's look at how you actually operate within this legal vacuum you've created. You don't arrest criminals. You assault them. You don't gather evidence. You act on suspicion. You don't follow proper procedures. You make up your own rules as you go along. Every single intervention you make would be grounds for dismissal, prosecution, and imprisonment if performed by any human law enforcement officer. You break and enter into private property without warrants. You detain suspects without charges. You use excessive force as your first resort, not your last. You interrogate people without reading them their rights. You operate without oversight, without accountability, and without any of the safeguards that civilized societies have developed to prevent the abuse of power. And when you do turn criminals over to authorities, what condition are they in? How many suspects have you delivered with broken bones, internal injuries, or traumatic brain damage? How many have been so physically and psychologically damaged by their encounters with you that they're unfit to stand trial? How many have you essentially tortured in the name of justice? You claim you don't kill, but you've probably caused more police brutality victims than any other single entity in history. The difference is that when you do it, it's called heroism instead of assault. But the legal problems run deeper than just your personal conduct. Your very existence has corrupted every legal system on earth. Judges know that their verdicts might be overruled by alien intervention. Juries know that their decisions might be invalidated by superhuman judgment. Lawyers know that legal precedent means nothing when Superman disagrees with the outcome. You've made the entire concept of blind justice impossible. How can justice be blind when everyone knows that Superman is watching? How can legal proceedings be fair when one party might have the support of an all-powerful alien? How can anyone trust in legal protections when those protections can be suspended at any moment by someone who answers to no earthly authority? The psychological impact on law enforcement is devastating. Why should police officers risk their lives apprehending dangerous criminals when Superman can do it safely? Why should detectives spend months building cases when Superman can extract confessions through intimidation? Why should forensic scientists analyze evidence when Superman can just X-ray vision his way to the truth? You've de-skilled an entire profession. Police work has devolved from skilled investigation and community protection to basically just cleaning up after Superman and handling the cases too boring for alien intervention. You've turned law enforcement officers into janitors for your vigilante operation. And what about the courts? How do you cross-examine Superman's testimony? How do you challenge evidence gathered through superhuman senses? How do you question the credibility of someone who can literally see through walls and hear conversations from miles away? You've created a category of witness whose testimony is essentially unimpeachable, not because it's more reliable, but because no human has the ability to verify or contradict it. This has turned every trial involving your evidence into a sham. Defense attorneys can't meaningfully challenge your testimony. Judges can't question your methods. Juries can't evaluate your credibility using normal human standards. You've become the ultimate expert witness who can testify about anything, and your word becomes gospel simply because you have powers that no one else can verify or challenge. But perhaps the most insidious legal damage you've caused is the precedent you've set for vigilante justice. If Superman can operate outside the law, why can't others? If alien judgment is superior to human legal systems, why should anyone respect those systems? If might makes right when Superman does it, why doesn't that principle apply to everyone else? You've inspired countless other vigilantes, from billionaires in bat costumes to teenage mutants, all operating under the assumption that personal moral codes supersede legal authority. You've created a world where anyone with sufficient power can appoint themselves judge and jury, and the only thing stopping them is the possibility that Superman might disagree with their choices. This isn't just the breakdown of law and order, it's the systematic replacement of democratic governance with benevolent dictatorship. And the most terrifying part is that it works. Crime rates might be lower, disasters might be prevented, and wars might be stopped. But the price is the complete elimination of human agency in determining their own fate. You've proven that democracy is unnecessary as long as the dictator has good intentions. You've demonstrated that legal systems are redundant as long as the supreme leader makes good decisions. You've shown that human rights are irrelevant as long as the alien overlord is benevolent. The rule of law isn't just a system of crime and punishment. It's humanity's attempt to create a fair, accountable, and democratic society where power is distributed and no one person can determine the fate of others. You've replaced that entire system with yourself, and you call it justice. You are a supremacist, not in the crude, obvious way of historical tyrants who proclaim their superiority through hatred and violence, but in something far more insidious and dangerous, a genetic supremacist who genuinely believes his superiority is a scientific fact, not a prejudice. You don't hate humans, you pity them, and that pity, wrapped in love and concern, is the most sophisticated form of bigotry ever deployed against a sentient species. Let's examine what you really are. The last surviving member of a species that considered itself so superior to all other life that they destroyed their own planet rather than adapt to its changing nature. The Kryptonians didn't die because of natural disaster or cosmic accident. They died because their arrogance, their certainty in their own superiority, their refusal to change or compromise led them to ignore warnings and dismiss alternatives until it was too late. And you are their genetic heir, carrying not just their DNA but their fundamental worldview. You are the walking embodiment of Kryptonian exceptionalism, the living representative of a master race ideology that your parents literally died to preserve. Every cell in your body carries the genetic memory of a species that viewed other life forms as inferior, primitive, and worthy only of study or management. When you look at humans, you don't see equals. You can't. Your Kryptonian genetics literally prevent you from experiencing the physical vulnerability, mortality, and limitations that define the human condition. You've never felt truly powerless, never faced genuine mortality, never experienced the helplessness that makes human courage meaningful. How can you possibly understand or respect a species whose defining characteristics are completely alien to your nature? You view humans the way humans view children. Cute, well-meaning, deserving of protection, but fundamentally incapable of making important decisions about their own lives. Your paternal attitude toward humanity isn't kindness, it's condescension. You don't see them as different but equal. You see them as different and lesser. This is why you're comfortable making decisions for them without their consent. Parents don't ask children for permission before protecting them from dangers the children can't understand. Colonial administrators don't consult with natives about policies the natives aren't sophisticated enough to appreciate. Masters don't negotiate with servants about household management that exceeds the servant's capabilities. You've internalized the same hierarchical thinking that has justified every form of oppression in history, but you've dressed it up in the language of service and protection. You're not ruling humans. You're managing them. You're not conquering them. You're civilizing them. You're not enslaving them. You're caring for them in the way that any superior being must care for inferiors who can't care for themselves. The most chilling aspect of your supremacist ideology is how completely you've disguised it as altruism. Historical supremacists at least had the honesty to admit they were motivated by self-interest. They wanted land, resources, power, or glory. You've convinced yourself that your domination of humanity is actually sacrifice, that your control over them is actually service, that your superiority over them is actually burden. This self-deception makes you infinitely more dangerous than any honest tyrant. Tyrants can be reasoned with, negotiated with, or appealed to through their self-interest. But you genuinely believe that your supremacy is good for everyone involved. You think your genetic advantages create moral obligations. You imagine that your power comes with responsibilities that justify your assumption of authority. But let's examine what those responsibilities really are. You've decided that because you're stronger, faster, and more durable than humans, you should determine how they live. Because you can see through walls and hear across continents, you should monitor their activities. Because you can survive things that would kill them, you should make decisions about what risks they're allowed to face. This is the classic logic of genetic supremacy. Physical advantages translate to moral authority. Superior capabilities justify superior status. Evolutionary advantages create natural hierarchies that should be respected and maintained. Every racist, every eugenicist, every advocate for genetic hierarchy throughout history has used the same reasoning. They point to real or imagined biological differences and use them to justify social, political, and moral inequality. You've simply taken this logic to its ultimate conclusion. Your genetic advantages are so overwhelming that you don't just deserve to be at the top of the hierarchy. You deserve to be the hierarchy. The terrifying efficiency of your supremacist system is that you've convinced the oppressed to embrace their oppression. Humans don't just accept your superiority, they celebrate it. They don't just submit to your authority, they worship it. They've internalized your evaluation of their inferiority so completely that they can't imagine life without your benevolent management. This is the dream of every supremacist movement, to convince the inferior group that their inferiority is natural, beneficial, and permanent. You've achieved what historical oppressors could only fantasize about. You've made your subjects grateful for their subjugation, and you've done it all while maintaining the fiction that you're just trying to help. You're not asserting Kryptonian superiority. You're just using your natural gifts responsibly. You're not establishing genetic hierarchy. You're just responding to obvious moral obligations. You're not implementing alien supremacy. You're just being a good neighbor. But strip away the rhetoric and examine the reality. You are a genetically superior alien who has appointed himself the manager of an inferior species. You make their important decisions. You solve their significant problems. You determine which of their conflicts deserve intervention and which of their struggles build character. You decide what level of risk they should be allowed to face and what challenges they're capable of handling. This is supremacy in its purest form, not the crude supremacy of hatred and violence, but the sophisticated supremacy of love and concern, the kind of supremacy that sees oppression as care, domination as service, and inequality as natural law. You are not humanity's protector. You are their genetic superior who has graciously consented to manage their affairs. You are not their hero. You are their benevolent master who ensures they never have to face the full consequences of their own inferiority. You are not their savior. You are their evolutionary replacement, kindly maintaining them in a state of perpetual dependence until they naturally fade away. The Kryptonian supremacist experiment didn't end when your planet exploded. It was exported to Earth, refined and perfected. You are the ultimate expression of your species' belief in its own superiority, a master so perfect that the slaves thank him for their chains. And the most horrifying part, you genuinely believe this is love. You create your own enemies. Every villain you've ever faced, every threat you've battled, every crisis you've resolved exists because you exist. You are not Earth's protector fighting against naturally occurring evil. You are patient zero in a pandemic of escalating threats that grows more dangerous with each passing year. And the most chilling part? You need these enemies. Your entire identity depends on having monsters to fight, chaos to prevent, and a world that requires saving. Let's start with the obvious pattern. Before Superman arrived on Earth, the most dangerous threats humanity faced were wars, natural disasters, and criminals with conventional weapons. These were serious problems, but they were human-scale problems that human institutions could eventually learn to handle. Then you showed up, and suddenly the world was plagued by supervillains, alien invasions, and reality-threatening catastrophes that occur with suspicious regularity. This isn't coincidence. It's cause and effect. Your very presence on Earth sends a signal to the universe that this planet is significant, that it's worth attacking, that it contains something valuable enough to draw the attention of cosmic forces. Before you arrived, Earth was an insignificant backwater that most galactic powers ignored. Now it's a constant battleground because everyone knows that's where Superman lives. But the external threats are just the beginning. The real damage you've done is to create a new category of human villain. People who are specifically motivated by your existence. Lex Luthor is the perfect example. In any timeline without Superman, Luthor might have been just another ruthless businessman or corrupt politician. Unpleasant, certainly, but manageable through normal legal and social institutions. Instead, your presence transformed him into something far more dangerous. A man whose entire identity revolves around opposing you. You didn't just create another criminal. You created a super criminal whose every scheme, every invention, every moment of genius is focused on destroying you. And in the process of trying to destroy you, he's become a threat to everyone around you. Think about Luthor's evolution. He started as someone who genuinely believed humanity needed protection from alien influence. He saw you as a threat to human independence and potential. He wasn't entirely wrong about that, was he? But your dismissal of his concerns, your refusal to acknowledge the legitimacy of his fears, your assumption that opposition to you must be motivated by jealousy or madness, pushed him into increasingly extreme measures. You created Lex Luthor by being exactly what he feared you were, an alien who assumed he knew better than humans what was good for them. Every time he tried to warn people about the dangers of alien dependency, and you proved him wrong through superior force, you validated his deeper concern that humanity would become helpless without learning to oppose you. And Luthor is just the most obvious example. How many other brilliant minds have you inadvertently corrupted by your presence? How many scientists, inventors, and leaders have been driven to villainy by the psychological pressure of living in a world where human achievement will always be second-rate compared to alien perfection? But the enemy creation goes deeper than just inspiring human villains. Your battles with these enemies create an arms race of escalating threats. Each villain you defeat is replaced by someone more dangerous who learned from their predecessors' mistakes. Each crisis you resolve sets the bar higher for the next person seeking to get your attention or prove their worth. You've created a world where being a regular criminal is pointless because you don't respond to regular crimes. If someone wants to make a statement, get your attention, or challenge your authority, they need to threaten thousands of lives, not dozens. They need to develop planet-threatening weapons, not just dangerous ones. They need to operate on a scale that matches your own power level. This is why your world is plagued by megalomaniacs with doomsday devices rather than ordinary criminals with ordinary weapons. You've inadvertently established minimum requirements for villainy. If you're not threatening global catastrophe, you're not worth Superman's time. So anyone who wants to challenge you must become capable of global catastrophe. The psychological impact on potential villains is even more insidious. Living in a world with Superman creates a specific type of mental pressure that doesn't exist anywhere else. Brilliant, ambitious, megalomaniacal personalities who might have been content with normal-scale villainy are driven to cosmic-scale madness by the knowledge that they will always be inferior to an alien. You've created an entire category of mental illness, Superman derangement syndrome, the psychological condition that develops when human egomaniacs are confronted with the reality of their absolute inferiority to an alien. Some, like Luthor, channel this into obsessive opposition. Others, like Brainiac, are attracted to you as kindred spirits in superiority. Still others, like Doomsday, become focused on destruction as the only response to your seemingly indestructible nature. But perhaps most disturbing is how you use these enemies to justify your own existence. Every time a new threat emerges, every time a villain escalates their schemes, every time a crisis threatens the world, you point to it as proof that humanity needs protection. You never acknowledge that these threats exist because of you. You never accept responsibility for the arms race your presence has created. Instead, you use the chaos you've inadvertently caused as evidence of your necessity. Look at all these terrible villains, you seem to say. Look at all these cosmic threats. Look at how dangerous the world has become. Isn't it lucky that Superman is here to protect you? This is the most perfect psychological trap ever devised. You create problems that only you can solve, then use the existence of those problems to justify your continued intervention. You're not protecting humanity from naturally occurring threats. You're protecting them from threats that exist because you're protecting them. The most chilling example of this pattern is your relationship with Doomsday. Here is a creature that was literally designed to kill Superman, that exists for no purpose other than to be your perfect opposite. It has no motivation beyond destroying you, no goals beyond ending your existence. It is, in the most literal sense, your shadow made manifest. And yet you treat its existence as a cosmic accident, a natural disaster that happened to target you. You never ask the obvious question: why does the universe keep producing things specifically designed to destroy you? What is it about your presence that creates an equal and opposite reaction of pure destructive force? The answer is that systems naturally produce antibodies when they detect foreign intrusions. Doomsday isn't your enemy. It's Earth's immune response to your presence. The planet itself is trying to eliminate you, and it will keep generating increasingly dangerous attempts until it succeeds or you leave. But you can't leave, can you? Because without enemies to fight, what would Superman be? Without crises to resolve, what would justify your existence? Without chaos to prevent, what would distinguish you from just another alien living on Earth? You need the villains more than they need you. Your identity as Earth's protector depends entirely on Earth needing protection from threats that wouldn't exist without you. You've created the perfect sustainable conflict, an endless cycle of escalating threats that you can fight without ever having to win permanently, because winning permanently would eliminate your purpose. And the most terrifying part? You've convinced yourself that this endless cycle of crisis and resolution is helping humanity, that the constant presence of existential threats makes them stronger, more united, more appreciative of what they have. But what you've really created is a world addicted to chaos, dependent on crisis, and unable to function without the constant adrenaline rush of near-extinction experiences. You haven't made humanity stronger. You've made them trauma-bonded to their own destruction. You are not Earth's protector. You are its greatest threat, masquerading as its savior by fighting the symptoms of the disease you carry. You've turned humanity into addicts, not addicts to drugs or alcohol, but to something far more insidious and harder to break: dependency on you. Every time you swoop down to solve a problem, every time you prevent a disaster, every time you rescue people from consequences they could have faced themselves, you're administering another dose of the most potent drug ever created: the illusion that someone else will always handle the hard parts of life. This isn't accidental. Dependency is how every controlling relationship works, whether it's between abusers and victims, cult leaders and followers, or dictators and subjects. First, you identify or create a vulnerability. Then you position yourself as the only solution to that vulnerability. Finally, you ensure that the dependency becomes so complete that the victim can't imagine life without you, even when your presence is what created their helplessness in the first place. You've applied this formula to an entire species with surgical precision. Before you arrived, humans understood that strength comes from facing adversity, that wisdom emerges from making mistakes, that character is forged in the fires of struggle. They knew that the only way to become capable of handling difficult situations was to actually handle difficult situations, to fail, to learn, to try again, to gradually build the skills and confidence that come from overcoming challenges on their own. You've systematically dismantled that understanding. You've taught them that when things get really difficult, when the stakes become truly high, when the problems seem insurmountable, they should step aside and let someone with real power handle things. You've convinced them that their own efforts are quaint, touching, but ultimately unnecessary when serious problems require serious solutions. This is the psychology of learned helplessness on a global scale. When laboratory animals are repeatedly subjected to negative experiences they can't control or escape, they eventually stop trying to escape even when escape becomes possible. They've learned that their actions don't matter, that outcomes are determined by forces beyond their control, that the best strategy is passive acceptance. You've done this to humanity. Every time you intervene to prevent them from facing the full consequences of their choices, you reinforce the lesson that their choices don't really matter. Every time you solve problems they could have solved themselves, given enough time and effort, you teach them that their effort is inferior to your effortless intervention. Every time you rescue them from situations that might have made them stronger, you confirm that they're too weak to handle real challenges. The most insidious aspect of this dependency is how good it feels. Being rescued is pleasant. Having problems solved without effort is convenient. Being protected from consequences is comfortable. You've made dependency feel like love, helplessness feel like safety, and infantilization feel like care. Humans don't resist your interventions because they've been conditioned to see them as gifts rather than impositions. They don't question your authority because they've been taught to see it as service rather than control. They don't examine the long-term costs of dependency because they're too grateful for the immediate benefits of rescue. But let's look at what this dependency has actually cost them. When was the last time humanity as a whole demonstrated genuine courage in the face of existential threat? When did they last show the kind of determination that overcomes impossible odds through pure human will? When did they last prove to themselves that they could handle apocalyptic dangers without supernatural intervention? They can't, because you've never let them try. Every time they might have discovered their own heroic potential, you've stepped in to demonstrate your superior capabilities. Every time they might have grown stronger through struggle, you've eliminated the struggle. Every time they might have learned that they're more resilient than they think, you've prevented them from being tested. You've created a civilization of eternal children who've never been allowed to prove they can handle adult responsibilities. And like children, they've internalized the message that they need adult supervision, that they can't be trusted with important decisions, that the serious work of protecting and managing the world should be left to the grown-ups. This infantilization affects every aspect of human society. Why develop robust international institutions when Superman can prevent wars? Why invest in disaster preparedness when Superman can handle disasters? Why build economic systems that can weather crisis when Superman can stabilize any situation? Why cultivate individual courage when Superman embodies perfect courage? You've systematically undermined every institution, every system, every cultural value that might have helped humanity develop genuine independence and resilience. Not through malice, but through kindness. Not through oppression, but through protection. Not through force, but through making force unnecessary. The dependency trap is complete when the victims become afraid of their own independence. They start to see freedom not as liberation, but as abandonment. They begin to interpret your absence not as opportunity, but as danger. They learn to panic when they have to handle problems themselves, not because they're incapable, but because they've forgotten they're capable. This is where humanity is now. They don't just want your protection, they need it psychologically. They don't just appreciate your interventions, they require them emotionally. They've become so dependent on your presence that they can't imagine survival without it, let alone growth, progress, or achievement. And you've convinced yourself that this dependency proves how much they need you, rather than recognizing it as evidence of how much damage you've done to their capacity for self-reliance. You see their helplessness as justification for your help, rather than as the result of your help. You interpret their fear of independence as proof that they're not ready for independence, rather than as a symptom of the conditioning that's made them afraid of their own strength. The most tragic aspect of this dependency is what it's cost humanity in terms of unrealized potential. How many problems could they have solved if they'd been forced to solve them? How many innovations might they have developed if necessity had been allowed to drive invention? How much courage might they have discovered if they'd been required to face their fears, rather than having someone else face the fears for them? You've created a world where human potential remains forever theoretical because it's never tested, where human resilience stays undiscovered because it's never challenged, where human heroism exists only in stories about the past because the present doesn't require heroes when it has a God. The dependency you've created isn't love. It's the opposite of love. Real love wants the beloved to grow, to become stronger, to discover their own capabilities. Real love accepts the risk that comes with growth, the pain that comes with learning, the temporary failures that lead to eventual success. What you've given humanity isn't love. It's the selfish satisfaction of being needed, the psychological pleasure of being indispensable, the addictive rush of being worshipped. You've made them dependent not because it's good for them, but because it's good for you. And the most horrifying part, you've convinced yourself that their dependency is their choice, that their helplessness is their nature, that their addiction to your rescue is evidence of your heroism rather than proof of your crime. You haven't saved humanity. You've destroyed their ability to save themselves. And you call it love. You know what happens when gods grow tired of their subjects, don't you? When protectors decide their charges have disappointed them. When saviors conclude that the people they've been saving aren't worth the effort anymore. History is littered with the corpses of civilizations whose benevolent guardians decided that benevolence was no longer the appropriate response to human failure. And you will fail them, not might fail, will fail, because that's what gods do when they stop believing in the righteousness of their own interference. The question isn't whether you'll betray humanity's trust. The question is what will trigger that betrayal and how complete the destruction will be when it comes. You've already shown glimpses of what you're capable of when your moral certainty wavers. The injustice timeline isn't science fiction. It's prophecy, a window into the inevitable future when Superman decides that humanity has proven unworthy of his protection and requires his dominion instead. When the benevolent alien becomes the tyrannical overlord he was always destined to be. Let's examine the psychological trajectory that leads every absolute power toward absolute corruption. It starts with disappointment. You save the world, and humans go back to fighting each other. You prevent a war, and they start 3 smaller conflicts. You eliminate a disease, and they invent new ways to hurt themselves. You solve their problems, and they create new ones that seem deliberately designed to waste your efforts. At first, you rationalize this as human nature. They're flawed, you tell yourself. They're learning. They're growing. Give them time, and they'll become worthy of the sacrifices you've made for them. You maintain your faith in their potential, even as they repeatedly demonstrate their limitations. But patience, even divine patience, has limits. And you're not actually divine, are you? You're an alien with godlike power, but very mortal psychology. You have emotions, frustrations, ego, pride. You can be hurt, not physically, but psychologically. And the deeper your investment in humanity's improvement, the more painful their failures become. The breaking point always comes from a sense of betrayal. You give them everything, and they give you nothing in return, but new problems to solve. You sacrifice your happiness for their welfare, and they pursue their own happiness at each other's expense. You model perfect heroism, and they continue to choose selfishness, violence, and stupidity. And slowly, inevitably, you begin to ask the question that destroys every benevolent dictator: why am I serving people who refuse to serve each other? That question leads to another. What right do they have to waste the gifts I've given them? And that leads to the fatal conclusion: perhaps they need firmer guidance. You've already shown this thought process in moments of crisis. When Lois died, when humanity disappointed you one too many times, when your patience finally snapped. What happened? You stopped asking for cooperation and started demanding obedience. You stopped suggesting improvements and started imposing them. You stopped protecting their choices and started making their choices for them. The Injustice Superman isn't an alternate universe version of you. He's you without the psychological barriers that currently restrain your more authoritarian impulses. He's what you become when you finally admit to yourself what you've always believed: that you know better than humanity what's good for humanity, and their opinions about their own governance are irrelevant obstacles to optimal outcomes. And the terrifying thing is that when that transformation happens, you'll still believe you're the hero of the story. Dictator Superman doesn't think he's a villain. He thinks he's finally being responsible, finally doing what should have been done from the beginning, taking direct control instead of hoping that inferior beings will somehow stumble toward better decisions on their own. Every tyrant in history has justified their actions through the same logic you'll use when your patience runs out. They can't govern themselves, so I must govern them. They can't protect themselves, so I must protect them from their own choices. They can't see what's best for them, so I must force them to accept what I know is best. The psychological infrastructure for this transformation is already in place. You already believe you're superior to humanity. You already operate outside their legal systems. You already make decisions for them without their consent. You already override their choices when you disagree with them. The only thing that currently restrains you is your belief that they might eventually prove worthy of the freedom you currently allow them. But what happens when you stop believing that? What happens when you conclude that they're not evolving toward wisdom, but reverting toward barbarism? What happens when you decide that your gentle guidance has failed and only direct control can save them from themselves? You'll become exactly what Lex Luthor has always said you were: an alien dictator who conquered Earth through manipulation rather than invasion, who enslaved humanity through kindness rather than force, who destroyed human independence through protection rather than aggression. And the most chilling part is that humanity will initially welcome this transformation. They've been conditioned to see your interventions as salvation, your control as care, your dominance as protection. When you stop asking their permission and start simply taking charge, many of them will be relieved. Finally, they'll think, Superman is taking responsibility for fixing everything permanently. By the time they realize what they've lost, it will be too late. You'll have eliminated every institution that might oppose you, neutralized every individual capable of resistance, and crushed every system that could challenge your authority. They'll be completely dependent on your benevolence, with no recourse if that benevolence ever falters. And it will falter, because benevolent dictatorship is a contradiction in terms. Power that answers to no authority inevitably becomes corrupt. Control that faces no resistance inevitably becomes absolute. Rulers who believe their own propaganda inevitably become the monsters they once fought against. The betrayal is inevitable because the relationship was never sustainable. You can't save people from themselves indefinitely. You can't protect them from consequences forever. You can't make their choices for them eternally. Eventually, your paternalistic protection becomes suffocating control. Your benevolent guidance becomes tyrannical dominance, and your heroic intervention becomes villainous oppression. When that moment comes, when you finally reveal your true nature as humanity's conqueror rather than their protector, they'll have no defense against you, no weapons that can hurt you, no institutions that can constrain you, no heroes who can oppose you. You'll have systematically eliminated every potential source of resistance while convincing them to thank you for their own disarmament. The ultimate betrayal isn't that you'll become evil. It's that you'll make them accomplices in their own enslavement, grateful participants in their own destruction, willing victims who helped you build the cage they'll die in. And throughout it all, you'll maintain that you're still trying to help them, still protecting them, still saving them. Because the deepest delusion of every tyrant is that their victims should be grateful for their oppression. The betrayal has already begun. Every intervention is preparation for domination. Every rescue is practice for control. Every act of heroism is a rehearsal for tyranny. You're not becoming humanity's destroyer. You always were. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. You don't belong here. That's not an insult or a xenophobic statement. It's the fundamental truth that underlies every problem you've created and every solution that humanity needs to embrace. Earth is not your world. Humans are not your people. And the sooner both you and they accept this reality, the sooner both species can begin to heal from the damage your misguided protection has inflicted. The greatest lie you've ever told yourself is that you're Clark Kent from Smallville, Kansas. You're not. You're Kal-El of Krypton, the last survivor of a dead world, carrying the genetic memory and cultural programming of a species that destroyed itself through the same arrogance you now display toward humanity. You're an alien refugee who has overstayed his welcome and confused temporary shelter with permanent citizenship. But here's what humanity needs to understand, and what you need to accept. They don't need you. They never needed you. And every day you remain on Earth makes them weaker, more dependent, and less capable of reaching their true potential. Before you arrived, humanity was on a trajectory toward greatness. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and natural disasters through ingenuity, cooperation, and sheer determination. They had built civilizations, explored continents, reached for the stars, and begun to unlock the secrets of the universe through their own efforts. They were a young species, flawed but growing, making mistakes but learning from them, facing challenges but becoming stronger through the struggle. Then you crashed into their world and short-circuited their entire evolutionary process. You replaced their need to grow with your willingness to protect. You substituted their potential strength with your actual power. You traded their future independence for present security. And in doing so, you robbed them of the most precious thing any species can possess: the chance to become what they were meant to be through their own efforts. Humanity's greatest heroes weren't the ones with superpowers. They were the ones who faced impossible odds with nothing but courage, who solved unsolvable problems with nothing but determination, who saved the world with nothing but the unshakable belief that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when necessity demanded it. You've made that kind of heroism obsolete. Why struggle against impossible odds when Superman can handle them easily? Why develop extraordinary courage when ordinary vulnerability isn't allowed to exist? Why believe in human potential when alien superiority is constantly demonstrating its limits? The path forward isn't complicated, but it requires something you've never been able to provide: the humility to step aside and let others take responsibility for their own lives. Humanity needs to rediscover what it means to be human without divine intervention. They need to remember that their weakness is also their strength, that their mortality is also their motivation, that their limitations are also the source of their determination to transcend those limitations. This doesn't mean abandoning them to face dangers they're truly unprepared for. It means trusting them to grow into their challenges instead of protecting them from growth itself. It means believing in their potential instead of substituting your actuality for their possibility. It means having faith in their eventual wisdom instead of imposing your immediate solutions. The withdrawal won't be easy. Like any addiction, dependency on Superman will create withdrawal symptoms. There will be crises you could have prevented, but choose not to. There will be problems you could have solved, but decide not to. There will be people who die who might have lived if you had intervened. But there will also be heroes who emerge because heroism becomes necessary again. There will be innovations that develop because innovation becomes crucial again. There will be cooperation that forms because people must rely on each other instead of relying on you. There will be strength that grows because strength becomes required again. Humanity's true heroes won't be the ones with perfect powers and unshakable moral codes. They'll be the ones who choose to act despite being afraid, who stand up despite being vulnerable, who fight despite being outmatched. They'll be the ones who prove that heroism isn't about being invulnerable, but about choosing to be vulnerable for the sake of others. And they'll inspire others not because they demonstrate what perfection looks like, but because they prove what ordinary people can become when they refuse to accept that ordinary is enough. The real question isn't whether humanity can survive without Superman. The question is whether they can truly live while Superman is still there to prevent them from facing the challenges that would make them worthy of survival. You've spent decades trying to make humanity better by protecting them from the experiences that make people better. You've attempted to save them by preventing them from learning to save themselves. You've sought to serve them by ensuring they never have to serve each other. But true strength isn't given, it's earned. Real courage isn't demonstrated by the fearless, it's shown by the fearful who act anyway. Genuine heroism isn't the province of the invulnerable, it belongs to the vulnerable who choose to risk everything for others. Humanity doesn't need a better Superman. They need the chance to become better humans. And that chance only exists in a world where human choices have human consequences, where human problems require human solutions, and where human potential is tested by human challenges. Your greatest act of heroism won't be stopping another disaster, preventing another war, or saving another city. It will be having the wisdom to recognize that the help you provide has become the harm you inflict, and the courage to step aside so that others can step forward. The time has come for the false savior to remove himself so that true heroes can emerge. The alien must leave so that the humans can finally learn what it means to be human. The god must abdicate so that mortals can discover their own divinity. Humanity's greatest enemy has never been Lex Luthor, Doomsday, or Brainiac. It has been the alien in the cape who convinced them they needed saving from challenges that were actually opportunities, protection from experiences that were actually education, and rescue from responsibilities that were actually their path to greatness. The ultimate act of love isn't staying to protect them. It's leaving to liberate them. Your world is dead, Kal-El. Let theirs live. The greatest gift you can give humanity isn't your presence. It's your absence. Not because you hate them, but because you finally understand what love actually means. Wanting someone to become the best version of themselves, even if that means they no longer need you. Especially if it means they no longer need you. Go home, Superman. Let humanity find theirs.